Great way to start.
Hey guys.
I'm never going to let you touch the mouse again. We are on today with Sanne Collée, and we are going to talk about ADHD and being diagnosed with it at a older age and how that feels.
Very recently, actually.
Yeah, and we're going to do that on
A Wonderful Chaos.
Jesus, you're not gonna break, are you? Bye. Cool. So I guess it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe. Sanne posted. Sanne posted on Facebook that she was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and that experience gave her a kind of a weird mix of emotions, a mix that says, so now I have, on one end, it felt like a relief. Oh, I can make sense of all these experiences I've had in the past. And on the other end, a weird stigma, like, hold on, if I have this, what does that mean? And what do people think of me? And how do I kind of share that with the world? And what does that look like? And it was interesting because when she wrote it, she was so open about her sharing that I thought, how cool is it to invite her on?
Yeah. Obviously, she shared it on a Facebook post.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a big difference between sharing it on the post and then discussing it live. And sometimes when I send out a message like this, I actually don't expect people to respond, or they say, thank you, but it's a little bit too much or it's too close. Give me a few weeks or months or whatever, and I'll come back to you possibly. So when I sent her the message, she said, let's talk about this. I thought, how cool is that?
What does that tell you about her?
It tells me that she's made peace with whatever it means to have this. At least enough peace to have this discussion. I mean, if you think about it in my life, I always think to myself, like, there's degrees of making peace with something. If I accept that this is part of me, then I can be at least free enough to have a discussion like on this forum. If I say, no, that isn't me, then all of a sudden, all I'm doing is protecting and not wanting to show that part because I'm scared. So the liberation I found in my life is when I celebrate the thing that others might even think is a detriment or whatever they might judge.
Yeah.
So what it shows is she's not going to step away from it, but she's going to embrace it and see what that means to her. I'm sure we'll probably discover part of that even on the show.
Yeah. Like how I know her on a personal level is she will show up even if it's uncomfortable because she knows it's going to benefit her in the long run.
Nice.
Like I see her as someone that really shows up. She's got guts.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
she's warned us that her parents are watching,
so we have to not use any bad language.
So we're going to at least try to moderate what we say, just to make sure that we're not too offensive. We're also told that they don't necessarily speak English that well. So if we do say things, we'll speak faster then, just to make sure that they don't understand. Either way, we'll figure it out somehow. Okay.
We put this picture in the background, and every time I look,
I don't know. I just saw it and made me laugh. I thought, why not use that picture?
So I'm thinking like it's a good prerequisite. Like every time we use an image, it has to make me smile.
Yeah,
this one definitely.
You see, the alternative was I had that black dystopian image with like 5 faces on it, which I think you just said no to that. We can quickly show what I was thinking about going with for this episode.
Andy had this. He had that.
I really didn't give you much choice, did I? I mean, basically, it was like, do we want to set the stage for this episode by having something so dismal in the background? No. So I think with that, it may be nice to bring her on and say hello.
Sanne Collée.
Hey, Sanne Collée.
Hey,
Collée.
Hey, bandos.
Thank you. How was it for you to come on? I mean, you got my text message. You sent this beautiful, message out to the world. And then some guy says, hey, why don't you go on and broadcast this to the world in another form? How was it for you?
I actually I was very honored, first of all. I had my own reasons for sharing it, which I will share later as well. But my first instinct was like, oh, I just found out I'm not an expert on this. How can I, explain this or talk about this without having any knowledge about it myself? Because it was very new to me. And I think we had a phone call where I actually explained my worries, or I explained this, and then you said, like, well, that's actually the point. Like, we're all not experts. We're just gonna, discuss what comes up. And I think that made me feel very comfortable to actually just come here and tell my story of how I feel and what I experience, and just really keep it to myself, keep it like close to my heart. And saying I'm not an expert on this. I'm just starting to understand myself in this, I think.
Yeah, because the weird thing is, and I almost think once we start to declare, I know, in some ways we separate from the experience. Like, there is an experience. It's unique to every person. Why would I want some authority to come in and tell me what the experience is? I'd rather hear what your experience, or anyone's experience, is, for that matter, because everyone has such a unique experience, but our minds gravitate towards categories and putting people in boxes. And I'm, I'm assuming, by the way, I have ADHD. Like I've when I was a kid, I had to bump my head to go to sleep, like till I was, I don't know, 12 or something.
Bump your head?
Bump my head. Like, I had a pillow and I'd have to bump my head to go to sleep. Like, I couldn't relax. And, my friends would call me spaz because I was always like, couldn't sit still. And
really?
Yeah.
Wow. You don't do that anymore.
I mean, I'm still a spaz, but people don't necessarily call me that. But yeah, so I had, as far as if I was in a different age, I probably would have been medicated, I'm guessing.
Did you like grow out of it?
I don't know if I grew out of it as much as befriended it in a weird way. Like, I also associated it a little bit with when I'm with people. I would get maybe nervous because I'd empathetically be picking up on sort of the subtle energy. And that energy would and then I used humor to alleviate that by making snide remarks so that I could kind of let that voice in my head sort of calm a little bit. So, of course, I got more of a reputation of being a clown or being someone, but in a weird way, it was also just a coping mechanism to calm the energy that was pulsating. And I got into running. So I became, 100 meters and a long jump, and it was always short distance. I couldn't go any further than 100 meters. That was like it, but it was like hard, strong, like it like satisfied almost that need in my brain to have it like done quickly. I can't explain it, but I can feel it in my brain as I speak about it. Actually, it's a very, very, it's an incessant, almost addictive. I'd say that would be the description I'd have for it.
Interesting.
What?
No, I like the way you talk about it. It feels like anyone could have that experience.
They could, and that's the question: is when does it become diagnosed as ADHD?
Yeah. I think. I mean, I cannot answer that, of course, but I remember going into the whole process of being diagnosed and like going through all the questions and the tests and everything, and then I was like, even in the beginning, I was like, okay, so what if I would get the diagnosis, and what would it do for me? Like, how would it make me feel? And also, would I believe it? Is it something like, because it is physically like recognizable, they can show it, but they won't make you like any brain scans, or they won't do that to show you. They really do it based on your symptoms or how you react, or how it affects your life, basically. And I think one of the reasons for me that I like what I realized after I was diagnosed and I was telling people, they were all like, oh, I have that too. Oh, I have that too. Oh, I have that too. And I was like, I talked to my psychologist about this, because some way it feels a bit belittling, as in like, oh yeah, we all have this. Don't like, we're not nagging about it. Why would you?
Oh, wow.
And so that's kind of how it felt for me. So I talked to my psychologist, who was like helping me through this process in the beginning a little bit. And he also said, there's this, obviously you're going to also be surrounded with people that are similar to you in character and personality. So first of all, yes, there might actually be a lot of people in your surroundings that have ADHD, or at least symptoms of it, like that really, or like characteristics that really stand out. And then secondly, you can always ask someone like, okay, but do you also have these symptoms 24/7? Because that's the difference. It's like, yeah, of course we all forget something sometimes. Of course we all have like voices in our head sometimes, or forget, like we have concentration issues or whatever. But do you have this 24/7? That's another thing. And I think the third thing was, my psychologist said, was like, if people say, hey, I have that too, then say, okay, get tested. Yeah. It's like, if you want to know, then just do it. And I think for me, those three things that I took with me when I would tell people, and I would be like, yeah, maybe you do have it if you really think you do, and you want to do something about it, or it's bothering you. Because for me, that was the point. It was affecting my life. So it was bothering me. That's why I wanted to do something about it and wanted to know. But yeah, I think for everyone, it's in itself. And I think a lot of people will recognize a lot of the things that people with ADHD have, but they don't have them all. And they don't have them 24/7. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
Sanne, what was happening as a pattern, as a behavior, to the point where you said, okay, enough is enough. I need to go and get tested. Something's going on here.
Yeah, it was actually a lot of things at the same time. I think for years I'd been running. Like I was always a very hyperactive child. I was always, my parents always had to keep me busy. And but like even my mom said sometimes, like, yeah, we knew you had ADHD, but like we just kept you busy, we just did things with you. And because I think my mom is a little ADHD as well, so she just enjoyed keeping me busy anyway. And so she was like, it never bothered you. And I think I got to a point where now I stopped traveling, because I also traveled a lot. I stopped traveling. I ended up in Amsterdam. I stayed here for 3 years. I got a 9-to-5 job. I started like teaching yoga by the side. I was like having a very structured life, which is something that people with ADHD crave, because it's really hard for us to make our own structure often. I don't want to generalize, but that's one of the symptoms. And so for me, it was really like I was running from one thing to another, having a very structured life, having like, very structured weeks. I would know everything I would do. And then at some point it was, my relationships were crashing. Then my work was too overwhelming. I had too many responsibilities. I was switching jobs. And then Corona happened. So my whole structure disappeared. So I ended up kind of I thought I was getting a burnout. So I called my doctor, and I was like physically ill as well. So I called my doctor, and they were like, well, sounds a bit like burnout or like depression or something. Maybe you should like contact a psychologist about it. And that's what I did. And then I came into the whole system of like, eventually figuring out that I had ADHD, and that indeed anxiety and depression and burnout are really more prone to people who have ADHD, especially if you don't know that you have it. So yeah, that's kind of how I came into it eventually. Yeah.
Wow. And what was when you're diagnosed with it, what's the follow-up? What happens from that moment?
Yeah. So you get like multiple options. I think the first one they start with immediately is medication. So they're like, well, you have these symptoms, let's start medicating. Which for me at that point I wanted. I was at a point where I couldn't get out of it myself, and I was feeling very, very like depressed, and I was like, I need help. So I started medication, and then you have like weekly checkups with a psychologist to basically see how the medication is doing. So I don't really get therapy yet, but it's really like just see, does this work for you? And for me, the first medications I tried were terrible. The side effects made me super anxious. I just like, it gave me like a boost in energy, but then after a while, I just thought the world was ending. So I think I tried like 4 different medications in the last 4 weeks.
I was going to say, it's maybe not the best time to start taking medication when you've got Corona, like fear throughout. Like, you can't separate. Is it the fear of the world going down, or is it this drug I'm taking?
Yeah, no, but I felt it very clearly. Like I could feel, if I would have taken my medication, I could feel it was that. Like I could really easily separate it. It was like as if someone put like a blanket on me, and it was just very, very terrifying. And my breath would go up, like my heart rate would go up, and it was just. it was not good. So I switched.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to take this anymore. So I switched medications a few times, and now I am trying something new, which is a very low dose, which for me really helps. And then they upped my dose, and I immediately went into the depressive state again. So I was like, okay, so at least I know what it is. So yeah, I'm gonna try that, and then I'm also starting cognitive behavioral therapy with a psychologist. Well, I'm on the waiting list now, so that is more to learn how to deal with my symptoms. So I have a lot of coping mechanisms that I taught myself, and a lot of them I am starting to recognize. And for me, it's now seeing which coping mechanisms do I want to keep and which should I get rid of.
Yeah.
So you're aware of all the mechanisms, is what you're saying?
No, not all of them, but I'm bumping into them. Like a lot of things that I didn't know were ADHD symptoms, I'm starting to see now. Where before I was like, oh, I thought everyone had that. And now I'm like, oh, wait, now I understand why some things for some people are way easier to do than for me. And I shouldn't have to push myself so hard on it, because, it's not an excuse. I'm like trying really not to use it as an excuse to not do things, but I'm trying to use it as a be kind to myself kind of thing. Like, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you're making it less personal in that way. It sounds like it's a road to enlightenment, actually, because if you see through your own patterns, all of a sudden you can then decide, hey, it's serving me, it's not serving me, but it's no longer unconscious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially making the coping mechanisms come to the forefront, and then you can deal with them, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Something you were saying, which was, we're talking about like how before I came to Amsterdam, I was living in Vienna, and I was thinking, I had to occupy my whole day. Like I was always 24/7. I had an event every day of the week, and I was really like attached to this rhythm. And I'm trying to, as you speak, I was like, wow, it sounds like when I was living that way, and I burned out all the time, like burned out to the point when I had to stay in bed for 3 days because I'd get up and I'd be dizzy. Like it was that really intense. And then as I hear you speak, I was thinking to myself, like, what is it that you see is hard to do because of the ADHD? What are the things you say, oh, this is not easy for me?
Starting with tasks. Like I know that ADHD, I think it stands for attention deficit disorder, and hyperactive disorder. I feel like it's more an interest disorder. So if I like to call it that, if I'm like not interested in something, even though it might have priority, like for example, doing taxes, I can't get myself to do it. It's just not there, because there's always then something more shiny or more interesting that I want to, like get my hands on and do, because that's where my interest lies. Yeah. And so, that's where the concentration comes in, of course. But I think for me, the biggest part is starting tasks. So once I get into them, I can get into like a focus, and then I can work for hours and forget time. But starting them, that for me is a really big issue, because I make them huge in my mind, even though they're very small. So I procrastinate a lot, which is something that I'm going to be talking about with my psychologist as well. I can go to extremes, which is something I do to myself a lot. It's like when I start something, I will like want to go to the extreme of something. So when I started yoga, I became a yoga teacher. Like when I started writing, I wanted to write a book. Like when, like all these things, there's no middle road somehow. And I'm not like saying that's bad, but once I'm in it, I can also be very overwhelmed. So I'm constantly looking for stimuli and change, and like really feeding myself to get like that dopamine level up, because that's what I'm trying to get. And then I'm there, and then I'm like super overwhelmed, and then I get really stressed, and I'm like, I want to go back to my routine. And then I'm back in the routine, and then I go searching for change again, and then like I'm in the change and I want to go back to the routine. So it's kind of like those things that in ADHD people, like I read a lot about this, which is another ADHD symptom. It's like when you get an interest in something, you get into this rabbit hole of information, and that's all you want to focus on. So when I got the diagnosis, that's what I did. I just read a lot about it. I watched a lot of videos about it and TED Talks and everything. But it's apparently a thing where, you get, like, see, this is another thing. Like, I forget what I'm talking about. So I go to extremes. There's no, I forget what I'm talking about. There's no middle road. So it's like normally people will go like this in their emotions, in their experience, in their dopamine levels. And what you have with ADHD, you either go really high or really low. So when you're in that low, you're going to search for a high, which is like why, like, I can be very impulsive. So I will, like, you know, which is one of the reasons I lived in 4 different countries in 5 years. And I was constantly like really happy in the beginning and then felt terrible. And then I needed that change again. So I went searching for that high and I moved country and then I did the same. So I think that is a really big one for me as well. Yeah.
It sounds like COVID helped you discover this part of yourself, because if you stayed in your routine, potentially you'd be moving country in a few months.
Yeah, potentially, yes. Still in my head sometimes, and I'm like telling myself, that's not it. You're not going to be happy when doing that.
As we talk, there's thoughts that come into my head, like the whole idea. You had symptoms that you experienced for a long time. They impacted you in ways you weren't happy with. Now you get a diagnosis, a label. How does it feel then to have this label attached to you, where actually before nothing actually changed except for the fact that now you are labeled potentially, right, as something, having something. How did that impact you?
Yeah. I think the first time I heard it, I was very emotional. I think not in a bad way. I was very relieved. For me, it was like, oh, wow, you know, there's a reason why I'm this way. Like, I'm not crazy or something like that. Like, so I've been thinking that a lot. Like, why is this so hard for me? Why is this easier for other people? Why do I have this constantly, this, as if there's like a jet engine in my head 24/7? Like, and for me, that was my first instinct. It was like, oh, I feel a huge relief. And then I had like this period of grief where I was like, I wish I'd known sooner. I was like I've been beating myself up so much during for example, my student times and everything, where I was forcing myself to work so hard. I think maybe if I had known, you know, like that I've had ADHD, I wouldn't have been like putting myself in positions where I was extremely like pushing my own boundaries and not in a good way. So I really went through a week of like crying about this. And wishing I'd known it sooner, or like forgiving myself basically for everything that I like pushed myself to do in my student times. And I think for me now, it has 2 sides having this diagnosis. On the one hand, I'm still very relieved, and I'm starting to realize a lot of things where I'm like, okay, you know, even when they happen, I'm like, oh, this is apparently because I have ADHD, like, you know, like losing like the red thread in my story, or interrupting people, or talking constantly. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, maybe that's the thing. But my diagnosis is, yeah, see, I do it again. Like I lose the red thread in my story. But I feel that right now it gives me a relief. Like I feel relieved to know where it comes from. That like I have to watch out. I'm not going to use it as an excuse. That's a bit what I have on the other side, where I'm like, okay, I am this way because I have ADHD, deal with it. Or like, I'm going to procrastinate because I have ADHD. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. So that's why I want to do therapy, where I'm like, okay, I want to be able to, to learn how to deal with all these things, like to learn how to use them as my strengths, basically, because there's also a lot of strengths in having ADHD. And yeah, I think for me, that is a really important one also, to figure out like, what are my strengths and how can I use them in a positive way.
Well, you look like someone that will not give up. Like if you set your mind to something, I think some people at some point, they might like, oh, I'm done with this, but you'll keep plowing. So in a way you can accomplish.
Yeah, it's another thing actually of like, which I realized maybe it's a character trait, but it's also an ADHD thing, where you have, if you really have an interest in something, you get into this thing called hyperfocus, and you just, like I said, you go down this rabbit hole of like wanting to know everything about that topic. And which is one of the reasons why there's a lot of these huge entrepreneurs out there that actually have ADHD, because they got stuck into a topic they really liked, and that's what they worked on like day and night, because that's what happens when you have ADHD and you're interested in something. So I think, yes, I can get really stuck in certain topics, and especially I have this feeling of righteousness, of like justice. So I think for me, my hyper focus is really in like social impact and sustainability, which is one of the reasons I started working in that, which is also one of the reasons I can get really emotional about my work. So I think, for me, it really showed like my path and how I took it, how that actually had something to do with my drive, which again is related to my ADHD. So yeah, I found that very interesting.
How did it play into relationships?
I think looking back, I can be very, I usually run into people that are a little bit like me. So I have some people that I dated that have like at least some ADHD symptoms. So because also if I look at my best friend, she also has ADHD. So the way you think, you can jump from one topic to another and you don't mind. Like there's like, and you forgot what you started talking about in the first place. So I think that for me really helps. And then also, I also dated someone who was like the opposite of me. I had a long-term relationship with him, and he was a very, very calm person. And he grounded me a lot. So that actually really helped. But at the same time, I really missed, like someone someone challenging me in that way. So if I look at that relationship, for example, I was still very impulsive in all my ways, where I was like, I want to like travel, and I was also quite young. So I was like, I want to travel and I want to do stuff. And he was really like, oh, let's just think about it. And I'm like, no, let's just go. Like, and those things, they may play up, but specifically in relationships, I haven't I don't know yet, because I don't know if it's like my character traits or is it actually symptoms of ADHD that that cause, arguments or whatever. And at the same time, I'm also starting to learn like some of my ADHD symptoms are also character traits, and I want to keep them. Yes, I can be.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting is you might almost call anything a character trait to the point that it doesn't serve you anymore.
Yeah, I think so.
Because if you think about, you were talking about your focus, and getting incessant and doing, you might say, yeah, it's great to do it, but at some point it crosses a threshold where I get sick and it doesn't serve me anymore. And I've often seen that these extremes create, and at the same time, there's a cost to be paid.
Yeah.
And it's a funny thing. The things we elevate in society and say are great and good attributes, and we cheer it on, and then someone dies of a heart attack at 50.
Yeah.
Was it great, or was it, or was it actually not serving them and they weren't able to see that because their mind just took off and let it go wherever it was going?
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons what I said about, being diagnosed. I think for me, it was like, maybe I'd known my whole life I had ADHD, but I never had an issue with it. Like, it never negatively affected my life. I could deal with it. I lived with it. I actually used it to my power, until a point where it started negatively affecting everything. And that's when I was like, and now I want to do something about it. And I think
you said when you were in school, it was also impacting you then. You weren't happy about it. What was it that was happening then that you weren't happy about?
Yeah, so I have a very perfectionistic character, which apparently is also something you build up if as a child you have ADHD. So that's another thing that you can really build, because usually as a kid you can you'll hear a lot of the things that you might do wrong, like in school. Like, there's so many times people will be like, be quiet, sit still, like why can't you finish this? Like all these kind of things. And I wasn't really big on like, didn't have huge concentration problems in school. I was quite calm at school, but I was extremely hyperactive at home. So, and I had this really big fear of failure, basically, which is a perfectionistic trait. And that kind of continued during my studies, which is why I always thought I was a great planner during my studies. But apparently I wasn't. I just did everything immediately because I was like, I need to get everything fixed. So in the end, when I started studying, I was like, I need to, again, go to this extreme. I need to pass with honors. And I had no social life next to my studies. I didn't enjoy my studies. I just did them because I needed to pass with honors. And I needed to do it perfectly because otherwise I wouldn't be worth as much as a person, right? And for me, I think that's also been a journey in my personal development or like, spiritual path in that way to learn that, you know, the things I do don't really like have any say about my own value as a person. But yeah, it really affected that in perfectionism. And also another trait of mine that I have, which apparently is also linked to ADHD, is that you can deal with negative feedback or it feels like extremely hurtful. So I know that people in general can, you know, can feel like it's never nice to get negative feedback, but it affects you so much that it really affects your self-worth. Also because you hear about like so many times more as a kid negative comments than a kid that doesn't have ADHD, that it becomes this huge thing for you. So if you get something negative as an adult, like you hear something, you didn't do your work right or whatever, it can be extremely hurtful. And it can get you really stuck into this like depressive or like negative energy. Yeah.
You mean you hold it there for a few days, or?
Yeah, you can let go, and then
we're gonna
and
have
it's
to
also
talk
you
about
feel it like super intensely. That's another thing. It's like when someone says something negative to me, I thought like the world was ending. You know, it's like holy shit! Like I did this, and now like nobody wants to be my friend or something like that. And I think especially when you have ADHD, that becomes big, or at least for me, that became huge when I grew up.
I'm curious. I know, you know, that also another one of these acronym things or the things that people talk about is like bipolar. And I often talk about my dad as being bipolar because he went to these extreme emotional states very quickly. And it doesn't sound like that's ADHD, but it also sounds like at least there's a piece of it that's sort of similar in some ways.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think when I got tested, that's also something they look into. But when you have, I actually read this as well, because when you are bipolar, you stay in these states for quite some time. So you're like extremely depressed for like 2 weeks or something at least, and like even longer. And then you get into this huge high where you think you're like on top of the world, maybe even like narcissistic. And then you want to like spend a lot of money or like be extremely impulsive. And I never had that. So I never really had the highs that much. And my lows were like a maximum of 4 days. So it is close, but like, I mean, there's a lot of symptoms that are the same. Just like, for example, high intelligence, there's a lot of symptoms that like combine with ADHD that are the same. And also, you know, they're looking now into it. It hasn't officially been recognized, but high sensitivity, it all comes together in ADHD. So it's like there's a lot of these symptoms that overlap, and indeed, bipolarity is one of them. But it's a way more extreme version of it, basically. Yeah,
it was interesting because we had John Kohler was my book publisher, and he was on a show, and he's bipolar, and I remember writing him an email. And I said, hey, listen, everything is really good. And there's one thing you could have probably done better that, you know, you maybe not have thought about it, but this is the impact if you do it that way. And it was maybe like the easiest, softest, most beautiful, not even a criticism. And then that had such an impact on him. It blew me away.
Like how did he respond?
He responded like, oh, sorry, it wasn't written, it was spoken. He said, it hurt him on such a deep level because he experienced this on like as if it was the massive criticism. And it was like the most loving, simple, like, hey, you might not want to do it that way because I see that is the impact. It wasn't even personal to me, but it was more a general. And then he was like, Andy, you just poured salt on my biggest wound, probably. And not even, maybe it was even worse because I made it so impersonal. It was like he had to face the reality. He can't even react to me. It's like he has to actually see the reality of his life in that way.
Wow. Like as we're speaking like this, I'm feeling all this in my body to the point like
that's the
Sanne, I noticed a few times you said my ADHD. Mine.
Yeah.
And then the way you talk about it also sometimes like it's another person that's standing next to you, so it feels like you've consciously or unconsciously you've given it a personality. Or are you aware of that?
No, not in this way. I am aware that I say my ADHD because I feel like it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
And I've read a lot about it in the past couple of weeks, but I think there's of course many symptoms that are similar for a lot of people that have ADHD. But I like to say my ADHD because I really can't see now which ones are mine, basically my symptoms. Wasn't aware that I was talking about it as a separate
I heard it the way you expressed it. So when you said my ADHD, what I heard is my form and shape, because I'm not going to hold the universal understanding of everyone with ADHD has the same. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, I'm like, after this call, I'm like, oh, I've been ADHD my life. I didn't really diagnose it from banging my head, not sitting in a seat, called spaz, never being able. I even as you spoke about regimenting your life, my question to you is, how would it then be? I mean, COVID, obvious, is the quintessential what the fuck, but not COVID, but just like, what would happen before you were taking drugs to calm when plans would change without your intention of changing them? What would happen in your mind when that happened?
I had coping mechanisms for that. I think first of all, I would always have a backup plan, which is one of my coping mechanisms. So if I plan something, I always have a backup plan. And then another one is I had my yoga, which is something I started 3 years ago. And I really, again, also in that pushed myself, like I became obsessed with it. And that's when I started doing it every day. And I think now I have a little bit more of a healthier relationship with my yoga. And I do it every day. I need to start my day with either yoga or something active to make sure that the rest of the day I don't have this like super high level of energy. And because I have a desk job, so I need to be able to get my energy somewhere in the morning to be able to sit normally and sit still, as still as I can, because you see I'm probably moving a lot. But yeah, so that was it. And then at the same time, I always am surrounded by people. Like I'm very bad at being alone. So even if it's not like I'm autistic. I don't have that where, if plans change, I will freak out. That's not it. It's more that like I really like to have structure in my days. And even if something changes, I will just make sure I fill it up with something else. I cannot have nothing to do. That's more the issue. And that was it for years. And I think especially even before my diagnosis of ADHD, I started learning already that it's okay to not have to be busy the whole time. I don't have to be productive every second of my life. And I think I also learned that a bit like through authentic relating and all these kind of things. Like it's okay to to sit still and do nothing.
So you didn't want to become an authentic relating facilitator?
I don't know.
What happens to you when you take the drug? What is your experience of the world, and how is it different?
Yeah, so when I started taking my first drugs, which was a very intensive one, it was like the adult version of Ritalin. It felt like I was like in my bubble, like someone put like a bubble around me, and that's all that I saw. And it was amazing for work-wise. I had never been that productive, but at the same time, it also flattened my personality a lot because I didn't really see a lot of the things that were happening around me. I was super focused, hyper-focused. Which is what it did with my head. And then in my body, I was like, the side effects are just a lot. Like I felt it like kick in, as if, it is an opium in the end. So it's like a really light dose of ecstasy. So you feel like it kick in, and you feel like you're on an extremely light high, which is what I had. But then, when it would wear off after like 6 or 7 hours, I would also feel the extreme low. So it would really help me focus if I wanted to work, but the side effects were not worth it. And also I would never take it, for example, like take medication if I would go out and be active, because I wouldn't be myself. And so then I changed medications, and now I am on something that I'm actually trying to figure out how much it does for me. So even I actually had my medication consult this morning, where I was asking my psychiatrist, like, hey, I don't have any side effects, but I also don't know if it's doing anything for me. Like I don't know if I feel it. So now we're actually having this idea of, okay, we're just going to take a few days next week of not taking it, and then we're going to take a few days of taking it and journaling and asking people around me how I am and see what it does. Because this one doesn't have that like kick in effect that I feel. So so I don't really know. So I'm still trying to figure it out.
When you said, I'm curious on the first one, because I was just, I kind of had a, empathetically, when you speak, I kind of have a experience in my head. When you said bubble, like, can you explain what that was like, this bubble? So you're very focused. You don't really see or pay attention to what's going on around you. So was the bubble, was it like a dream-like state, or was it like, no, I zone out everything else? Like, how would you describe the experience?
I think it's more like, for me in my head, it was like a fog has lifted. It was just like, I see everything so clearly now, because my thoughts would jump from one place to another, and suddenly I had this, like, I could do one thing and then do the next, instead of like going all over the place. So that was what was happening in my head. Like, I could actually structure my thoughts. But like, and it's not like a dream kind of state. It was not like I was high or something. It was really like, I knew I had a goal and I had to get through it, and I could immediately see how to get there. And I think that's what I felt. And that's the focus, I think, that I meant. Like, and then everything around you doesn't matter anymore, because you see that goal and you very clearly see how to get there. And I was like, do people have this the whole time? Like, they don't have this like spider web of thoughts. It's like, okay.
Yeah, that must be to experience the contrast, but it must also be a little bit freaky in some ways, because that's like a whole nother way of living that you are getting reacquainted with, or never having had been acquainted with.
Yeah, I think that's where my grief came from, right? I was like, wow, everyone, like most people have this the whole time. Like, imagine if I would have had this during my study times, I would have been able to do 6 studies. Like, that's how I felt, where I was like, I would have been able to do so much more knowing that I could live this way, or I would have been so much calmer in myself knowing that I could live this way. And at the same time, that scared the shit out of me, because I was like, what if I become then dependent on this medication? Like, what if I want to live like this forever? And that's another side where I'm like, I don't want to be dependent on the medication. I think for now it's very helpful, but I want to be able to do this on my own eventually, and to learn how to live, with my symptoms, and maybe quiet my mind by myself a little bit. But yeah, for now it's helpful.
Yeah, I remembered with my dad, he would often take drugs, and then it would numb him. And so he'd say, I'm going off the drugs, after he'd sort of mellow. And then so like when he'd be on drugs, he was fine to be around. And then when he was off, it was like a nightmare. So it was interesting to see how he of course was the bipolar, which was more extreme. So everyone else in his world suffered. In your case, it's more you suffering as opposed to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some of the medication are kind of similar to an antidepressant, so they do affect your mood. So I think there was one that I tried that really affected my mood. Like, it made me very happy. Where I was like, okay, well, I am quite a happy person, but this is not normal. I have like no care in the world. It's really nice, but I can see why that would be addictive. And then also not taking it another day, then you're like, I want that feeling again, because I feel like, I'm not, I can be this very happy person. Why wouldn't I want to be? No. But I think for me, the main thing was being very aware of that. And also before I even started, I discussed this with my psychiatrist, where I was like, I only want to do this if I also know I don't need it. Like I want it at that point. So that's why I have weekly meetings with him, sometimes even twice a week, to discuss mostly the medication. And but I get the highs and the lows, definitely. Yeah. Especially in the beginning when you're trying to basically sort of set a new baseline with these medications, because that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, you have to see how they impact you. You learn from it's like you're running an experiment on your own body and brain to see what it, how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
We know your parents and your aunts are on, and they're all listening. So I thought it would be good to talk about, the pregnancy and how is that going?
The what? I think my dad just had a heart attack. That's so mean.
And now I'm looking at the little Asian baby.
Now everyone suddenly understands what the baby is for.
Oh no! For anyone listening, hilarious. We promised that we would we wouldn't have any fun, but I just couldn't help myself.
That's funny. Yeah, I think they can appreciate it.
Yeah, it's funny to me because, as you know, I used to be a drug addict, so I could really relate to. Sometimes I would take something, and I go through the journey, but I wouldn't know if it affected me or not, and then it only took contrast to see how it impacted me. Like, oh wow, that all happened.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that you might need to take it a few times, stop, take it a few times, and then get that. Bird's eye view.
But I mean, you were taking heavy drugs, right?
Yeah, but I'm talking about the first time. Like, I remember my first time on LSD, for example.
Okay.
Like, I took it. I had such a journey. I got into arguments, and it all felt normal. Like, hey, how was it? It didn't affect me. It was so. It took me a few times before I realized, oh wow, that's really a contrast. Like, okay, that's not part of me.
Interesting.
Yeah. What's interesting?
LSD. I don't know. That's a pretty heavy drug. I can't imagine someone taking it not knowing that they've had it. I mean, I don't know how many drugs you were taking, but that must have been heavy duty if you could take a drug and not even know you were on it.
Well, it's because
it's like you don't have a baseline.
It's because you go on a journey, and in a way I never hallucinate on that. Never.
Oh, you never hallucinated on it?
No.
LSD is acid, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if we can compare that to like what I'm taking, because I'm not having hallucinations. But
what I'm finding very curious, this is a meta level thought, okay? Is that basically we go through life with whatever our predisposition is, however we are triggered or reacting to our environment, and we create a baseline of this is normal. Mm-hmm. And then we project, as you mentioned early, that normalcy onto the world.
Yeah.
Because if this is the way I live, especially as a child, we can't really distinguish between our feelings and other feelings. It's just everyone has our feelings in our heads. Mm-hmm. And when we move into a drug, then basically that drug gives us an experience that reshapes how we potentially experience and see the world.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is if your baseline is already so not foundational, like there's no foundation, you might take 20 things and you don't even know how it's affecting you, because for you, your mind is already so muddled anyways.
He's trying to say that I was muddled, and I was.
That's what I'm kind of thinking maybe Bambos, if he's taking LSD and says this is how it is every other day.
Well, you've got to imagine that it takes whatever you are feeling, it enhances it. So if you're feeling crappy when you take it, it just multiplies that. If you're feeling great, you have a great trip.
Interesting. Okay. So you felt bad, and that just multiplied that experience.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So, son, like if you take a deep breath in right now, this moment, and you just tune into yourself, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. I I'm looking back at the last 3 months of my life, and I feel like I'm coming out on the other end. That's how it feels. Like I've been through this tunnel, and I've been very depressed and sad, and I'm very relieved now. And I'm like, yeah, I feel very grateful for everything that's happening now, and like that I'm feeling, and I'm like really like letting it all in as well. Like I feel really open. So I feel like I can receive a lot more than I could before. Maybe also because I'm a lot less hard on myself. So, yeah.
Nice. And I assume that part of that gentleness came from giving it a name. So being able to say, this is not just me.
Mm.
And then probably the drugs also soften a little bit of the edge so you can see a little bit clearer.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's both. Yeah, I think it is difficult to say because I'm like, yes, I have ADHD. Okay, it explains a lot. That softens it a lot more. At the same time, it also gives me a lot of new opportunities. So I get a little bit excited where I'm like, oh, wait, I have ADHD. There's actually a lot of strength in that. Like, what haven't I used yet? So I get really excited to figure that out. I think that's where also a lot of positivity comes from. And also, I think towards other people, because I didn't realize that I wouldn't call it social anxiety, but I didn't realize how much I was always thinking that I needed to hold back to make sure that people liked me. And now I have this this diagnosis, and I'm like, well, I have ADHD. You get like what you see is what you get. Like I'm gonna be hyperactive. I'm gonna be annoying. And if I am, then tell me. That's another thing. So it feels like I'm a lot freer. And then of course I think the medication definitely helps. For at least for now, yeah.
And the criticism, because you said, tell me. Do you find now it's easier if someone says, you're being annoying, Sanne?
Yeah, actually it does. Yeah, because I feel like I'm not judging myself that hard on it anymore. I'm just like, that's where it changed. I think I used to judge myself a lot on all of my symptoms and my hyperactivity. And now I'm not doing that anymore because I'm like, okay, this is part, like my brain is literally wired differently. Like it's like you can show it. And so I'm like, okay, I can accept myself more in that way. So if someone would say something about it, I would be more like, nah, bummer.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
My practice. I'm just like, yep, I am annoying.
And it's fucking great.
And it's great.
Yeah.
We have just under 7.5 minutes. Are there any areas that you would like to go to?
I think we touched upon a lot.
Okay, bye.
Your parents are watching now, right?
Yeah.
And your aunts. I'm not going to do the same joke again. I'm sorry. If you think about them now, what would you say the thing that they maybe didn't necessarily know how to support you? If you were to say, hey, this is how, if I had known what I know now, this is how you would have been able to support me, what would that be?
I think in their love, they would always tell me, do your best. And I think that was killing for me because I was obsessing about performance. And to tell someone who does that, do your best, like is never good enough. So because I couldn't shift my perspective from one situation to another, I would get really hyper focused into one thing. And then my best was never good enough. We just get into it. And I think it's a thing, a lot of parents say, like, just do your best, it's going to be great. And for me, that really was a thing where my perfectionism came from. So, yeah, definitely that's one thing that came up for me a lot.
Do your best. And it's kind of interesting because if you look at their side of it, I'm sure they would think, or not their intention, right? But it was like, you know what? Whatever you do is going to be fine. Do your best.
Yeah, exactly.
So in a weird way, it's the brain's inability to hear that message that way.
Yeah. Definitely. I remember they didn't mean it in their best way possible. Like, and especially they have 3 other children, they did the same thing too, and they have no issues with it, right? So it's really like a personal thing for me that really affected me. Yeah.
I remember one time when I was in high school, I was just goofing off. I got horrible grades, and I brought the report card home and gave it to my mom, and she said, "Andy, if that's the best you can do, it's okay." It was like the worst thing you could say. It's like the worst thing. Like no anger, no, like we're gonna punish you or you've got to get the grades up. If that's the best you can do, it's okay. Mm. She was using the Christian manipulation.
And Papa, when you saw it?
Papa didn't see it. They were divorced by then. I think my dad just didn't want me. My dad was Jewish, so he didn't like any of the values I was being raised with, because I went to a Catholic school, and he felt like the Catholic school was indoctrinating me with values he didn't identify with as a good Jew. Although he never went to church or temple. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was very lucky that my parents, I think my mom has ADHD. I think like we have been talking about it a lot lately. My dad is a PE teacher, so he has a job he doesn't have to sit still for. So I'm kind of like double in Dutch we would say double belast.
Yeah.
So we laugh about it now. But I think my mom, she was always like, yeah, we just like take you everywhere. We would like do so many things with you as a kid. And like other moms would be like, are you never tired? And she was like, no, like I love it because you love doing everything. Like you were a kid I could take everywhere and you loved it. Like you would have fun, you would be enthusiastic about it. And I think she is the same. So I think that's why, you know, I never felt like I was too much as a kid, like at least not at home, because my mom would just go with it. I think that's something that I really appreciate, especially my parents both being teachers. Like they've seen a lot of kids with ADHD, right? Like they see it. And my mom was just like, I had to keep you busy. That worked. And I'm very grateful that as a kid, I've never been medicated, where I was like, okay, you know, I was just always outside and running and being crazy. And that really helped me. So in that part, I'm really grateful for my mom and dad.
That's great.
If they're watching.
Yeah. What's the worst thing about your mom?
Oh, her impatience. Oh my God. And I didn't get that from another person. No, I can. Like she knows. I'm like, please.
Mom, you're impatient. You're impatient. You're impatient. I love it. I love that we get to talk to people that are off air, that aren't there. You know, Mom, you can comment if you want. You're wherever you're watching, you can defend yourself.
And you can do it in Dutch.
Yes, you can recognize it. Yeah.
No, but funny. It's a trait I recognize. It's the inability to do nothing as well.
I recognize a lot of your relationship with your mom, with my mom as well. Like I was so active as a kid, and Mom would take me everywhere, very active. I think she certainly had to keep me going. Her little spaz, as I was given the nominated at school.
I did not know that about you.
Yeah, it was called spaz. I mean, I couldn't sit still. It was like I was always vibrating. I had to, like I said, bang my head to go to sleep. Because that's how much energy I had. I had to bang, 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 and that was the only way I could go to bed.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'd even cut. I think I even got a cut on my forehead.
Wow, that's intense. Yeah. Well, I didn't do that, but at least my mom, because I talked a lot to her about this in the last couple of weeks, right? How I was as a kid, and she would tell me though, like, you always had this thing where, you know, everyone knew you were there, because it was just like, if you stood up, it wasn't just like, you're going to stand. It was like, I'm going to stand up. And like, it's just, everything was moving, and there was always like noise, and it was just never quiet. It was just like, yeah, it was just part of who you were. But yeah, it was an energy you also carried with you. It was just always very there.
So she wasn't shushing you.
Well, I mean, they did a lot. It is something that's in my head, you know, like I like, be still, sit still. Like it is something that like I keep replaying in my head because I still hear it, but I don't blame them for it, because there were also so many times that she turned chores or things into games, because like I wouldn't be able to keep my concentration with it. Like it's just everything was a game or a song when I was little, because that would help me. yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've been lucky that my mom was a teacher, so she like, she turned just everything into a song or a game, and that was really nice, because then I was able to do it. Otherwise,
well, I mean,
it would
you
be
basically figured out how to focus you. It's quite beautiful if you think about it.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Wow. Well, we're coming to our hour.
Oh, wow.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was really grateful when I send out messages when people Facebook personal things. I always know that 1 out of every 2 or 3 may go for it. The other 2 are like, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, writing it was hard enough. Being an hour on a show, like, what is that going to be? So, thank you for taking the risk and being with us and sharing. It was really beautiful. I think I learned part about myself now that I didn't know. Actually, this was a show that I learned a lot.
Yeah. Thank you for creating a space for me to be open. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, grateful. And David Kaiser's made several comments along the way. I think he said, "Ha ha ha, classic," when I said you were pregnant. So at least he got his joke. Thank you.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love when we get stories from people when they've just gone through things and they just sit with us and share without any authority, without needing to prove or defend, or just the raw, how it is. There's something so honest in that once it becomes a story, it no longer has just that raw truth. So you mentioned today we have a person we've booked has a. What are you laughing? I don't want to say what I was going to say now, because what are you going to say? Because if I say what I'm going to say, they'll say, why is he laughing?
I'm not going to say it.
Okay. I was going to say, well, you can say it now. What were you going to say?
I called her a bitch, and then we love her.
Who did you call that to?
Oh, I thought you were talking about the guest.
Oh, no. I was going to say, but by the way, she's embraced that name because she's been called it so many times throughout the years. We have the man with the brain tumor that you arranged to have on. I mean, for me, having someone going through a big life experience and letting us share time with them, I find really beautiful. So I'm really appreciating and loving that we get to have that together.
Yeah, his name is Benoit, and we had a 2-hour conversation about it, and we were laughing. I don't think I've laughed so much in such a long time.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, it'll be great to talk to him. If anyone out there is going through things and I think it would be nice to share and to help other people understand what that might be like, then we would love for you to let us know.
And we can explore.
We can explore. Thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Have a beautiful weekend on a
wonderful
chaos.
Chaos.